Hey, welcome to Honey, I Shrunk the Kitsch. This week I tackled my most complicated miniature furniture build so far, and I built this adorable mini pie safe. Come see how we did it. I'm kicking off this project with very little background knowledge, some pre painted plywood pieces, my trusty utility knife and miter shears, and this really cool instruction book called Jackie's Kitchen. And inside this instruction book, you'll see very detailed instructions for how to build this miniature pie safe. You'll see that in addition to having the measurements that I need to cut each of my pieces to, it also has templates so I can compare them and make sure that they're finishing at exactly the size that I need. Et voila! If you're thinking that all these teeny tiny pieces are looking a little rough, you are absolutely right. I am going to need to get out my sanding block and touch up a few of these little edges here. So now all the edges are smooth, but before I get too far ahead of myself in assembling, I'm going to take a minute using the diagram to just dry fit the pieces together. In regular furniture building, this is a good step to do because a difference of maybe half an inch or a quarter of an inch can make a big difference in how things fit together and line up. With furniture building, something as small as a 32nd of an inch or just a stray little bit of a splinter where I didn't cut something evenly, that could affect whether or not things really line up and fit together. Now, when I'm satisfied with my results, just dry fitting the pieces together, now I'm going to go ahead and glue them. And in order to do that, I'm going to put some painter's tape down, sticky side up, so that I can line up this side piece and then each of the cross pieces, and then glue them with the tape ready to hold them in place and secure them while they dry. Let's move on to when we start building the matching door. What I did there and why I really like this painter's tape technique is I was then able to line things up right next to each other and eyeball it a little bit more easily and get an idea for whether things are going to line up when it was all dry. Did it work perfectly? I can go ahead and tell you no, absolutely not. But it did, I think, save me a little time and it did mitigate how many pieces I needed to adjust later. And here again, I'm finishing up this side of the door by adding this side piece to the tape where it lines up precisely, and then going back and adding the glue. I ended up making about 8 of these, 4 to be either side of the hutch and 4 to be either side of the double door. It took a bit of time. It was totally worth it. So just put on a good show and stick with it. After the glue is dried, I'm going to carefully remove all of this painter's tape, and I can already see that there are a few places that I want to touch up. There are a couple little things I can do now that will make the finished piece look more polished and probably even fit together a little bit better. During the final stage of assembly, I'm going to take two of these matching ladder shaped pieces um, and sandwich a piece of tin in between them. And so while I'm starting to make these finishing touches, I'm going to layer two of these pieces together and sand them at the same time. And that just ensures that these edges are going to look really polished and fit together very nicely when I do get to that sandwiching step. Another thing I can do that will make a big difference in the finished look of the piece is I can take a minute to just fill in some of these gaps. And to do that, I'm going to use regular drywall mud. Last summer, I repainted my kitchen cabinets, and when I did that, I received some advice to fill in the wood grain with drywall mud. And it worked really well to fill in that grain and make the paint and primer go on very smoothly. So not only do I now have a huge bucket of drywall mud, but I also know that this will work well to fill in little bits like a splinter that's missing from the plywood. Because I use such a tiny amount of drywall mud to do those little fill-ins, it doesn't take long at all for it to dry. But before I move on to sanding it again or touching up the paint again, I'm going to dry fit the pieces one more time. This time is a little bit more satisfying. This is almost like a 3D puzzle that I'm taking some painter's tape. I've bound together the matching pieces that will form the sides and the doors, and I'm going to construct it with painter's tape holding it together the way it is in the diagram. And that lets me see whether things are lining up the way I want, whether I need to do just a touch more sanding so that it will stand evenly, um, and just to get an idea of how the doors are going to look once they're together as well. So now I'm going to untape everything and add a finishing coat of paint. To do this, I'm going to use the same color that I had for the base coat. It's called Jamestown Blue, and it's actually left over from our family room. I don't mind it doesn't have a sheen to it because I had chosen a matte finish to begin with, which, to be honest, I kind of regret doing on our walls, but I really like on miniature furniture. So here we go. I'm also watering it down a little bit. I added some distilled water just to the bottom of a party cup and then filled it up maybe 3 times more, 4 times more than the amount of water with some of my leftover paint and stirred it up really well. Using a watered down paint means that the paint coat is going to go on a little bit smoother. It's going to fill in any of those little places that otherwise might get a bubble or a drip from the paint being thicker. So let's go ahead and do that. While that paint is drying, I cut out panels out of this reflective scrapbook paper, which ended up not being reversible. So I cut out double the amount and used serrated scissors to cut around the edges just to decrease some of the bulk. Um, and then this is where I really went off the rails. This is supposed to look like punch tin, which is why I need it to look reversible, like it's tin on both sides. Also, I need to punch through both sides. And this instruction manual gave us a great little template for how to do that. I traced it on receipt paper. I laminated it with a bit of tape. I fully intended to use this template, and I practiced before I glued anything down. I practiced on some scrap of the reflective scrapbook paper. Um, and you'll see that I started to freehand because I got overconfident. And I ended up eventually freehanding the punch tin design into the final panels after everything had been glued in together. I wish I hadn't done that. I wish that I had stuck to using the template. But if you're going to learn from my mistakes, please learn from that one. And I don't dislike how it turned out. I'm just being honest. So back to assembly. I went ahead and glued together using a combination of super glue and my PVA glue. And of course, I'm sandwiching the double layer of reflected scrapbook paper in between each side of the matching, sides and doors in order to get these things to just crush together, because it turns out that double layer of scrapbook paper is a little thicker than I wanted it to. You wouldn't think it would make a big difference, but in the miniature world, it really does. So I sandwiched these in between some freezer paper and two multi novel collections of the work of Rosamunde Pilcher. And now we wait for the glue to dry. And once it dried, it was actually reasonably well put together. So I decided to go ahead and start making the punch tin designs. And as you can see, I totally had the intention of using my template on each and every square. And I totally abandoned it in favor of freehanding it, thinking, I guess, that I would get it done sooner. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. It, it turned out okay. Now we're going to move on to assembly. Finally, we get to use some glue. I am using for this part a combination of super glue as well as hot glue. The hot glue helps it stay together while the super glue is drying and giving it a stronger hold. I'm not using PVA glue for this part because I've noticed that it can have a little bit more of a texture or a bit of a raised uh, presence, I guess, and I'm not able to spread it out along these really narrow edges quite as well as I can with the super glue. Here's a good look at how I did it with just running the super glue all the way down the edge and then going back in with the hot glue and trying to very quickly make some little dots. The hardest part about this technique to me is that the hot glue can dry pretty quickly and also dry with a bit of a raised bump or a raised edge like I'm trying to avoid. So that takes a little bit of practice. But after we got it together, it was time to start assembling the inside shelves. And to do this, I went ahead and slid them in. They fit nicely, or they should fit nicely, on the rungs. Once the center shelves were actually glued in, that added a lot more stability to the piece and made it much easier to glue the top on, the bottom on, and even include this decorative scroll along the front edge. And once the glue is dried, I go in one more time with a little bit of mud, filling in any gaps and trying to get it as smooth as possible. And since I was using drywall mud, now I also need to go back in and do some more sanding, this time using an emery board so that I can really get in those nooks and crannies. And last but not least, I need to touch up the paint, especially in areas where I've done some mudding and sanding. Once again, I am filling a little bit of a party cup with just a splash of distilled water and trying to put about 3 times as much of the Jamestown Blue paint. I'm going to mix it up really well, and I'm going to use a small brush just to go over the areas that need to be touched up. The last task I have to do is to attach these doors with some appropriately decorative looking hinges. And I had the idea to use some eyelets and some hook and eye fasteners to make those. So you can see here on the door, I've already attached door handles made from some little eyelets. And I'm also going to use some eyes and some hooks. I'll connect them, and I'll just use these needle nose pliers to crimp the hook all the way shut. Then I insert the eye into the furniture side of the piece. I'm going to super glue the hook side onto the front of the door. And here we have a beautifully decorative operational hinge. I could not resist putting this into the little mouse house kitchen right away. I think it looks so cute there, and it fits one of my bottle cap pumpkin pies absolutely perfectly. Thank you for joining me on this really cool adventure. It was a lot of work. It definitely took a couple additional days past the usual week, but it was well worth the effort. If you're new here, I really hope that you'll hit subscribe so that we can see you again next week when we take on another project for the Christmas Mouse House. Thanks so much for watching.